Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Muska Ulhak, and I'm the Director of Programs at Social Innovation Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Investment Readiness Webinar. We will start the event shortly, but before we begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. I am joining you from the municipality of Clarington, which is situated within the traditional territories of the Mississaugas and Chippeways of the Anishinaabe, known today as the Williams Treaties First Nations. I am deeply humbled to call this land home and acknowledge their resilience and their long-standing contribution to this area. Today, we are excited to highlight Sketch Working Art's investment-ready journey, from the challenges to opportunities, how they successfully used social finance models, their impact measurement approach, lessons learned, and other practical takeaways. This webinar is part of our Investment Readiness Programming in partnership with Employment Social Development Canada. The goal with this program is to grow and strengthen the social innovation and social finance ecosystem by providing information, opportunities, resources, and connections that will help social purpose organizations become investment ready. Please stay tuned for more of these webinars. You can also sign up for our social finance newsletter to receive up-to-date information. In terms of the overall flow of this event, we will start with a brief presentation by Rudy Rudeman, Founding Director of Sketch Toronto and Sketch Institute. Following the presentation, there will be a panel discussion with important insights and perspectives from the rest of the speakers. There will also be an audience Q&A segment at the end of the panel, so we encourage you to have your questions ready for the speakers. And please use the raise hand icon, which is located at the bottom of the screen under the reactions tab. And then once you do that, we will unmute you so then you can ask your questions during that segment. Following the Q&A, there will be an informal networking session. We encourage you to please stick around for that. This will be an opportunity for you to meet and greet with the speakers and other attendees. I will provide more information after the Q&A session. Just some additional housekeeping notes. We have live French language closed captioning available for this event. So for those of you looking to have this feature visible on your end, you can select Show Captions on your screen and click the up caret button to select Translate to and choose your desired language from the drop-down menu. These instructions will also be shared in the chat by my colleague Kathleen momentarily. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please reach out to my colleagues, Alex, Kathleen, or Rudolph, our tech guru, using the chat feature, and they will be able to assist you. So without further ado, I would like to request Rudy to please join me and start the session for us.
Thank you so much, Muska. And thank you to Social Innovation Canada for trusting us with this very first session that you're providing. So we hope to do our best and be able to share this journey, which has been quite an exciting one. I do want to begin as well with respect on a land acknowledgement that we have at Sketch. Sketch acknowledges that we are living and working in traditional territories of the Anishinaabe in Takaranto, covered by Treaty 13, which has been stewarded since time immemorial to this very day by the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Putan, Seneca, and most recently of the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation, and is home to many Indigenous people. We seek to live and work in solidarity, building greater awareness, reflexivity, and knowledge to support the self-determination, justice, and leadership of Indigenous, Black, and all racialized people of Turtle Island. So thank you and welcome. We're very excited to share this story with you. And so I'm just going to switch over to share my screen so that you can see the presentation. And if I could just have a quick thumbs up, make sure we can see it. Everything's good. Thank you very much. So let's begin. We want to share some of the key strategies used throughout the campaign, how Sketch mobilized multiple funding sources and our community to realize our project. We hope to leave everyone feeling inspired and reflecting on the importance of space for all people. We are going to share how Sketch accomplished a very ambitious plan to purchase our spaces, bringing together fundraising, community bonds, and a traditional mortgage. Over 2.5 years, Sketch researched, designed, recruited support, and branded their campaign called Project Home. We could have gone a very traditional route and looked for a few people or foundations that might be able to write us that one big check so that we could just purchase it and we would be done. In hindsight, I am so glad that this was not the route we took, because beyond all common sense, we did it. In March 2021, during a pandemic, as we all remember, we did buy it. We purchased 1,300 square feet of an admin hub and 7,200 square feet of a studio spaces. With this store, where this story really starts is understanding what our intention was behind this decision. We can always, as we feel, always figure out the money. So there you see, we have our space. So what is Sketch? Well, since 1996, so we're in our 25th year, Sketch has become an award-winning community art nonprofit organization, engaging young people navigating poverty, living homeless or marginalized to experience and transform the power of the arts. It's the only youth arts hub of its kind in Canada. Sketch has been place-based arts organization for the last 25 years, and on-the-ground accessible space and resources to young people 16 to 29. There are 3 activities: arts wellness, arts production, and arts leadership. Over the 25 years, we have had to move several times before landing at Artscape Young Place. In 1996, 6 participants, 900 square feet, Queen and Dover Court. In 2012, we had 625 participants, 6,000 square feet, King West in Portland. And then in 2013, 426 participants with pop-up studios. Sketch had to move due to rent increases, trying to balance the need for more space to hold our expansive programming with Toronto's soaring real estate prices, each time losing momentum and having to rebuild connections as youth were searching for our locations. After years of moving, Sketch was ready to settle down. So creativity, in our belief, starts with space. In 2013, we moved into our current home at Artscape Young Place in Toronto's Queen West area. The rent was subsidized initially until 2018, at which time it would increase on an annual basis. We did not have it in our minds when we first moved there to purchase, but we did invest just under $2 million into the space to build it out fully equipped and accessible, a beautiful multidiscipline studio. In 2014, following a year of renovations, Sketch welcomed young people into our new home. The multidisciplinary arts studio, which was accompanied by an admin hub on the 2nd floor. It was perfect for the organization's evolving programs. Participant numbers were climbing, and the need for a community hub like Sketch was more clear than ever. So you can see the various opportunities that we built out within the space. And with that comes the impact. We had 15,000 youth engaged, 517 new participants annually. That's new participants. 7,944 total visits into our space. 80 young leaders, 27 youth-led initiatives on our platform, 150,000 young people reached in 2021. And here's part of the story of why.
My name is Joel Zola. I am a maker of community. I got kicked out of the house when I was 15 years old, and I got kicked off for like multiple reasons. My parents thought I was bad. I didn't really have much direction at the time. I was just going with the flow of life. For about 2 years before I came to Toronto, I was like shelter hopping and house hopping. So I went to all the shelters in Calgary and Edmonton. I came to Toronto with an intention, and that was to get into the arts field. So then I went to Sketch, and it was totally unbelievable because out west, I never seen anything like this. I never knew about a studio that was free, and all of these different arts are happening all in the same space. I fell in love. Street Voices was an idea that started when I was living in a youth shelter. The basic concepts behind that was just creating a platform for youth that don't have a voice. At the time, I didn't have money or connections or anything. Before Sketch, it was just an idea, but after Sketch, I got the funds to basically invest in the first magazine. Coming here, you forget about the fact you're living on the streets. On top of that, you might meet somebody else and you guys can relate. In order for real change to happen, people from the bottom need to rise to the top.
Thank you, Joelle, and you'll get to hear more from Joelle in a little bit. However, there was a dark cloud that was really looming over the organization, and as its impact rose throughout the GTA, alongside the financial stress of maintaining our downtown location. As a charitable, not-for-profit organization, we were dependent on fundraising to support our programs and operations. We managed over 60 revenue streams, including government grants, foundation grants, corporate grants, and our studio rentals. This was a revenue generator with two purposes: connecting to the community and raising funds to support the costs when it was not in the when we were not using it for the program. The reality of the area we were in saw rental costs rising to absurd levels. So when we started to look at what the future looked like, the numbers revealed that by 2025, once their subsidized rent term was over, Sketch would no longer be able to afford to stay at in the Queen West neighborhood. After engaging nearly 5,000 young people over 5 successful years at Artscape Young Place and $2 million spent in capital renovations, Sketch was faced with a difficult decision: purchase its studios or risk moving to another location outside the downtown core. In the fall of 2018, executives from Artscape Young Place offered to sell Sketch the space, with the traditional mortgage being too expensive to finance the purchase entirely. Raising this much capital would be a huge undertaking for our mid-sized charity. We connected with Tapestry Community Capital at that time to see what the feasibility for us would be. So Tapestry works with nonprofits and cooperatives across Canada to raise funds on our own terms as not-for-profit initiatives. Why community bonds? They're flexible, so Sketch could set our own terms. They're inclusive, individuals, institutions to invest. Engaging, creates powerful pride of ownership, no question. Efficient, faster than traditional donation campaigns, and equitable. Interest goes back to our own community. So within the feasibility that we did with Tapestry, we set up an advisory group and weekly project meetings. 2, we built a financial model and business plan, and we mapped Sketch community and hosted community consultations. Sketch has a practice of always going back to the community in order to determine what our best next steps are. And this was no different. So essentially, we started and compared to our past partners with Tapestry's past partners. CSI and SolarShare are 2 examples. Sketch was a bit of a unique charity for them, as we were mostly held free programming rather than a social enterprise. So getting started, there were more financial questions than ever. What did Sketch's financial picture in the future look like? How much debt could they take on? How to balance with non-repayable donations? What investment terms could be possible? So a community bond campaign paired with a fundraising and a traditional mortgage would make the most sense and make it possible for Sketch to engage its community while not taking funds away from our programming. Sketch formed an advisory committee comprised of experts from the real estate, investment.
Sorry, Rudy.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think you're showing slides, but no one sees them. I don't. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I'm so happy that you did that. That's not very. We created 3-tier level of funding in order to reach our $4.2 million goal. We had a 1.4 million in community bonds that we targeted, 1.52 in capital fundraising, and 1.1 in an approved mortgage. We started with the mortgage and then built out the rest in order to manage. The advisory plays a key role in developing this capital stacking that would work for Sketch. We started with mapping Sketch's community, discovering all of our relationships and people that could be engaged with Project Home, not just from an investing or fundraising perspective. These were the folks that needed to buy in to the project. But a decision like this would require buy-in from all levels of the organization. So I had to speak with participants at Sketch about the idea. This was a very difficult time for me because it meant that I had to sit with about 15 young people and say, we want to start this $4 million initiative, but yes, I can't afford to buy any more tokens this week. And the room got really quiet as I explained the whole plan. And within 5 minutes, all I could think is, oh boy, they're going to be really angry. And they were. But they were angry about the possibility of losing their space. This was not acceptable. And so we went forward and we created a team of ambassadors, of young people who would then help us complete this campaign. So it gets a bit messy at first, and then you work towards the plan. So are community bonds a good fit? After conducting an in-depth feasibility study, we turned our attention to building board support. We brought the advisory experts, which you'll hear from in a bit, to present to the board. And they approved under 2 conditions. Firstly, ownership, along with the costs associated with financing the purchase, could never balance out more than the current lease. And secondly, it couldn't take funds away from our operations by stretching Sketch's already limited donor base. In other words, donors would have to be new to the organization or able to donate to the project in addition to their regular support. Backed by the advisory committee, the organization, and now the board, Sketch, we were able to approach Artscape Young Place to agree to purchase the spaces based on our ability to raise the funds through mortgage, fundraising, and community bonds. So here was the structure for our bonds. We needed to settle on a series of bonds that could acquire investment from a diverse group of stakeholders, including young artists, very important, donors, corporations, and foundations. So we settled on a series of 4 what we call home bonds with varying investment minimums and terms. Our B bond was primarily focused, B and C were primarily focused on foundations, and they were offered at $25,000 minimum, the B bond, 4.5% interest with a 7-year term. That's the longest term. C, $10K minimum, 4% interest, 5-year term. And then the D bond was a community bond, $500 minimum, 3% interest, 3-year term. Very important. This allowed for our community and young people and those who've been investing in us for a long time have accessibility to joining this project and being part of the ownership with us. The bond that we will talk a bit more about later is the key bond for us was the giving bond that was invented by our advisory and those who were consulting with us. And it's the bond that keeps on giving. So bond A, it had a $5,000 minimum payment, capital loan, with 4% interest paid per year and a 5-year term. At the end of that year, people could choose and sign up for giving back the interest to Sketch as a donation and receiving a charitable receipt. So it's the bond that you can see keeps on giving. And essentially what's happened is that that bond ended up being our most popular. Also, it has cascaded to other bondholders who are now giving us back their interest payments in the form of a donation. To generate the cheapest cost of capital, Sketch developed the first charity bond, Bond A. And this has allowed us to effectively access an interest-free loan. So the idea is the investor purchases a giving bond, the charity returns the principal at the end of the term, and the investor donates their interest and receives the tax receipt. Also, what was key for the end of our fundraising campaign was the support of the City of Toronto in allocating $540,000 to Sketch's campaign. This came out of a Section 38 grant that was held as part of the buildings in the areas and through the stewardship of the city with Sketch to secure that funding. It was a key part of ending the fundraising side and then being able to complete our campaign. Just in our first year, owning our space has given Sketch the opportunity to deepen our impact within the community by allowing us to strategize for the long term. Instead of planning where do we go next, we now have the ability to really focus our energy on programming, thinking about how to best engage young people in social change. Next, there's a level of security that comes with ownership. And this isn't just felt by the organization. Purchasing our space means that young people know now they can continue coming to and accessing Sketch without fear that we'll have to pick up and move. This is huge, especially after such long periods of isolation within the pandemic when our studio doors had been closed to the public. So we bought it on March 31st, 2021, we did it. We officially signed and owned our space. It was a very exciting time and also had lots of challenges. So let's review the timeline for us. In October 2018, the offer was presented and advisory begins to meet weekly. In December 2019, we had an early purchase in which we bought the space and had an agreement with Artscape to pay out an owner. Now I'm forgetting the words. This is terrible. The campaign. We were able to buy the space initially, and then be able to then move into our campaign, which was for the bonds. In October 2020, the campaign was supposed to start in March, but as we know, it was pandemic, so we had to put a hold on it. We relaunched the campaign in October, and by March 2021, all our bonds were sold, and we had full ownership. In June 2021, our fundraising goal was met, and the campaign was able to close. Key to the success was really, it did mean having to have bold leadership and strong relationships. Strong relationships with our advisory, with our board, with our participants. We had an impactful project. We had a really great story, and we were engaging in participants in our community. And just so you know, we sold bonds right across the country. That was really incredible to learn. As far as the Yukon Territory, out to Nova Scotia, and everywhere in between. And that profile for Sketch means it's growing as a result of that broad exposure. Community bonds was an exciting new experience and certainly a major learning curve for all of us at Sketch. We are thrilled to have individuals, foundations, corporations investing in Sketch. We have 1.4 million in community bonds, 107 bonds in total, 100 home bonds sold, 10 bonds purchased by young artists, so young people who are holding bonds as well. 55% of those people are new to Sketch. 92% of investors are individuals. And our D bond ended up being one of the most popular for the new investors as a way of entering and getting to know Sketch. Most importantly, Project Home's bond campaign opened Sketch up to an entirely new audience of investors who otherwise wouldn't have engaged with the organization. In the end, we have first-time supporters of Sketch, and that is something to really consider as a not-for-profit organization. The impact goes without saying. It is savings are redirected already. We're seeing with our first year completed in 2021, we saw the savings that were being redirected. New skills built across the team. Project Home offered so much to all of us in that learning space, and what needs to happen towards being able to steward your own space and create some stability. New investors, home bonds ended up being a great acquisition tool, as I said, and being able to introduce people to the work of Sketch and the importance of the impact that they would have. I learned something new each day at Sketch. Sketch equals home. So for us, the space and the story was so much a part of how we marketed the campaign, but it also is authentic. It's true. This was critical for young people to be able to feel like they had ownership of the space and would be able to look to it in the future. We've been around 25 years. We want to make sure we're around for another 25. So thank you for watching that. And now what we'll do is we'll turn to a conversation with the 4 panelists that we have, 3 plus me in terms of panelists, and be able to, I'm just going to stop sharing now for that part. And we're going to have a conversation with several people who are both involved in the campaign and who are investors themselves. So if I could just start briefly by introducing you. I'm going to start with Michael Saki. Michael Saki is a South African-born investor who resides in Toronto and has had 20 years plus of broad financial services experience across Canada, Switzerland, and South Africa. He is a thought leader in advising nonprofit organizations and charities in the development of alternative funding strategies to create long-term sustainability. Michael was a key advisor and champion for Project Home. Ron Wild, after careers in engineering in Regina and an IT small business in Edmonton, Ron has focused on science and arts initiatives for the past 15 years based in Toronto. He actively supports innovative enterprises, commercial and social, and is a Sketch investor. Joelle Zola, you met a little bit on that video, is a highly accomplished professional with over several years of experience, developing programs and leading teams in the nonprofit and social service sectors. He's a strategic thinker and is skilled in project public relations, financial oversight, and marketing, as well as building strong relationships to achieve results. So thrilled to have you all here. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and let's jump into the questions. I'm going to start with you, Michael. Michael, if I can ask you to describe a bit about the role that you had with Project Home, and as well, can you share how Project Home worked from your lens, and what were the main elements and strategies?
Thanks, Rudy. It's a pleasure to be here today. I first got involved with the Sketch Home Bond when Rudy and a board member, we were having a chat a while back, and there was this idea floated around that Sketch was facing an issue about rising rent and owning their own space, and they just did not have the donor base or the financial capacity to purchase the space. So we threw around a couple of ideas, and we came up with the idea of how do we buy the building. And the initial idea was, well, it's all about cost of capital. We need someone to cut the check. And that's the way we would always recommend we go with these kind of instances. But unfortunately, we didn't have those kind of donors. So we had to be creative. We were forced to be creative. And it was the drive of Rudy who kind of said, this is what I want to do, and kept me going. So it was a very exciting role for me. It really was kind of taking the ideas from other investment professionals and my own and Rudy's, and putting them together, taking the finance side and actually making it work. So that was great to be part of.
Thank you. Joelle and Ron, maybe first with Joelle. Do you remember how you first heard about Project Home? And did you have any doubts or concerns about the project when you first heard about it and talked to anyone about that?
I think my earliest memory was figuring out that Sketch might lose the space.
Yeah.
And I just remember like being worried and scared because of how much people are actually impacted by this space and use this space.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was my earliest memory. I don't remember the second part of your question.
That's okay. Did you have any concerns for us? So you mentioned that. Yeah. So I think.
Yeah, I would say I would say that would have been my main concern. But after the project was completed, I was super relieved to hear that Sketch is going to keep their space, because I feel like the space at Sketch is literally what makes Sketch, and the space changed my life and other people's lives. And to have that space not there anymore would have been a terrible thing. So I'm happy that that is not a reality.
Yeah, and I will say Joelle was part of one of our moves to the new space, so you have a good sense of how important that space has been, even in your own transition. Yeah, thank you. Ron, how about you? Would you mind sharing a bit about what bond you selected and why? And did you have any concerns or reservations?
Yeah, we were. I say we. It's my spouse Brenda and I were just on the Sketch mailing list, so we weren't really active, but we were definitely interested in what Sketch was doing in the community. When we heard about this initiative, it really caught our attention because it's a significant undertaking, and so that drew our attention as we looked closer into it. Brenda's concern was about nonprofits buying space, and if it's just for offices, that wasn't something that we would really support. But as Rudy, as you mentioned, the Sketch facilities are custom built studios, with equipment, and there's a huge investment in the actual space, and the programs that are run for youth are space based. People need a place to go to. So I think Brenda talked to you at length about some of our concerns, and you got back to us on things we had questions about, to the point where we were comfortable with what the project was all about, and we invested at the $10,000 level, and yeah, we've been happy to come on board and to be part of this project.
It's great, and Ron is an example of someone who we've just been able to continue many conversations since then too. It's just opened up different discussions and explorations. So thank you, Ron. Michael, what do you think would you describe as our specific challenges with the campaign?
Well, initially we thought we would just get a mortgage from a traditional lender, and then realized that we didn't have enough credit, and the credit wasn't, it didn't meet the suitability of a traditional lender. So what we did was we went out and said, how much would you give us? And then we figured, well, could we make up the difference with the capital campaign? And we figured, well, realistically, we could only make up a portion of that. And then we had to look for an alternative source, and that's where community bonds came in. The challenge for me for this campaign was, first we had to convince the board that we weren't going to cannibalize the entire organization and put the entire organization at risk. So it was very important to make sure that everybody understood the risks involved. Secondly, was we were working with fairly new kind of innovative kind of financing, and it was a learning curve for all of us as we went through it. And we had to pivot along the way because COVID hit us. Initially, we had traditional finance, we were relying heavily on institutional investors. COVID hit and they all pulled out. There was a point in time where we were very worried we wouldn't be able to get it over the goal line. So you've just got to be able to adapt and be innovative and use different sources of finance and security to make it happen.
Thank you. Well said. Yep, it was challenging for sure. Everyone. So if you want to just maybe and if you want to speak to the pandemic, it affected everyone, and we see the impacts. It's ongoing with our community, but our involvement in Project Home. Does anyone want to speak to the effect of the pandemic on our project during that time? Joelle, do you want to say something?
Specifically to Project Home?
Yeah.
So I'm not too sure specifically to Project Home how it affected things, but I do know during the pandemic we had to adapt to a lot of online communication, and yeah, but I wouldn't be the best person to answer how that affected Project Home though.
Yeah, I think that what happened was having to slow down the campaign and wait to be able to relaunch it, and the challenges around everybody making decisions within foundations. And that was certainly a challenge. And you're right, everything having to go online. We couldn't generate energy in person. We had to really depend on online conversations and communication. I always said at the beginning of the pandemic, our biggest challenge will be communications.
And I think
yeah.
Right. And I think also the challenge of I don't know how many funders had the challenge of seeing the space, because I think Sketch is a space where it sells itself.
There you go. Yeah.
Also, when you walk in there and you see the youth and you see the different rooms and activities, then there's no question of why you need to support this and why this needs to continue going. So
you got it. That's exactly right. Good point. Thank you. Michael, how would you describe our impact measurement and how it was managed?
Well, I think that the way we, from a finance side, I always looked at it around what is the operational cost and how can we reduce that? Because if we can take money from paying rent and reduce your overall expenses, because rent was the second largest expense after salaries, and put that towards programming. So very simplistically, if we were able to redesign the debt structure, you had a line of credit at the time when we first met, but you had to put 100% security down for that line of credit.
Yeah.
Now that you own a building, you can use part of the building for that line of credit, and that capital can go to work. So the impact there is more money available for programming, and also more time could be spent on programming because your space is safe, and you've designed liquidity backups when the tranches mature. So we've kind of used lines of credit as security as well. So
yeah, very key, a very great example of how not-for-profits get held back with these kinds of loans or viability to keep moving. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Ron, maybe talk a little bit as an investor, your experience with your relationship with us and the reporting systems and communication. What formats have been accessible, and how have you felt about our reporting plan? And did you attend the annual general meeting and our investment meeting?
Yes, via Zoom, which is, as Joelle mentioned earlier, everything needing to go on to online communications has some drawbacks, but also some benefits. And the fact that your investor group can be across the country and participate in an investor meeting really works well. We found the process very professional. When people didn't know, they would get back to us. The reports and the whole system is not expecting people to be sophisticated investors. It's very clear. It's very transparent, presented in understandable language. What's going on and what's happening. So it's and I think it is a real benefit and feature of this project, that it appeals to anyone who has an interest in Sketch and its programs and its youth. You don't have to be a very sophisticated investor to be able to be part of this group.
That's great, thank you. And it's a big learning curve, as I said, for all of us. So that's really great to hear, and we are very invested in making sure that we support everyone who has committed to Sketch. Michael and Joelle, how would you describe how diversity and inclusion was included in our campaign? This is a very important topic, right, for everyone. It's always been important to Sketch, but let's just say, what is your experience with it at Sketch? And maybe start with Michael and then Joelle.
So I think initially when I was chatting with Reading, I came from an institutional background as well. Let's just find one investor, be done with it, and really taught me along the journey that it's about the youth and not us. It's not just about buying the space. It's about being inclusive and allowing people to have ownership. And that is why when we did the financing and the structure, we really wanted the participants and the community to be involved in ownership. So we made it affordable for the community to be involved. And initially I thought, well, it's a bit of a vanity project, but when you actually look at how that portion of the tranche encouraged other investors, it leveraged. So it really made sense. And it also, you do want to make sure that when you go down this path, it is all inclusive. You have to have the buy-in because there are risks involved with it.
Thank you. That's great. Joelle, what's your
I think diversity and inclusion was included by just highlighting the participants. You know, Sketch is a space that brings a lot of people from different racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, identities, etc. So I think it was included by just highlighting the participants. I don't think Sketch really tried. You know, it's a very diverse community. And and I think a lot of people have benefited from interacting with the different communities that come to Sketch. So
great. Thank you. Ron, can you share a lesson with folks around from the whole experience, from the Sketch investment experience?
Well, I think the main thing is that the organization, be doing good work in the community that you're supportive of, and that they're operating in such a way that yes, they need to raise funds to be viable and to continue, but that they're also raising support in the community, and even foundational to that is just even awareness of their program. So finding and learning more about Sketch and what it does, we were happy to get involved, and like most things, the longer you're involved or the more time you spend and the more you learn and appreciate what's really happening, that awareness and that support and probably the financial aspects will increase over time. So it's a process that builds on itself.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. How about Michael? Can you speak to advice around social purpose organizations that are looking to become investment ready? Any new models of generating revenue? Maybe we could chat a little bit about what those important models could look like, or advice that you would give to others.
So my first piece of advice is keep it super simple. If you can go the traditional route and it's cheap, you go that route. If you can get someone to donate the building to you, you go that route, because that's the cheapest form of capital. And as the scarcity increases, so does the cost of capital. Second, I would say is think big. Like, don't be afraid to think out of your box. Yeah. Don't be afraid to reach out to experts who can provide you advice, and don't underestimate your ability of innovation. The innovations that came through the financing came from the Sketch team, not the finance experts. And we just applied that. So Sketch something completely new around the financing. We also use Tapestry as the back office, because you need to ensure that you're not reinventing the wheel and you have the experts. Sketch has got is very clear in their purpose. The other thing is make sure that you know what the end looks like. So when you need to pay back the loans, you need to have different buckets where the maturities come due, and also provide a liquidity gap, which was we use a part of our mortgage as a line of credit to ensure that we have enough liquidity to repay some of the bondholders, because on average 70% of the bonds roll over, but that 30% where you've got to go make up and do the fundraising, you need to make sure you've got that capital available so you don't have a default when you're paying out. And the other area is you've got to manage the debt stack, make sure you don't over leverage it, and making sure that you are providing a reserve to make sure you can pay the interest. And just make that change, because you'd want to move away from the dependency of grants and funders to become self-sufficient, because ultimately for the interventions know best what they need to do for their community, not the funder.
That's great, Michael. This is a very important part of being able to share this story, and we hope to do it a lot more and really be able to share the details. You can hear from what Michael's saying, there's so much around the financial planning and financial development. It is critical you have the folks who have that knowledge and expertise in that area that will help you. On the other side, you want to make sure that you understand why you're doing this. I really feel like that's important, that you have the rationale and the reason for doing it, which is it's the altruism of it, which is for us the need for this space. And I believe that with every bone in my body, that space has to exist in order to make it accessible for those who don't have access in other spaces. The thing that Michael and I differ on is he will say, go out and find someone to buy the space. I really did deeply appreciate not having that in the end. It was a lot harder, and then you throw in the pandemic, but it's just introduced me as a leader in the sector to other ways of looking at the charity model. And how can we start to change and shift how charities work so that it enables us to the same way we want to, be present and offer opportunities for growth and trajectory within our communities. And we do know those communities. It's the same thing. We want to be able to sustain and understand how to build sustainable practices in our community. And getting to know the diversity of people and individuals and the different resources that have come with that has been tremendous. But that being said, yes, to not have a debt and not have to pay means that you have more funds and resources, possibly unrestricted, available to be able to support the intention of the work that you're doing, whatever that is. And for us, it's with young people.
And it was also strategic partnerships. That was a learning for me of how many large organizations came on to provide, strategic partnerships for Sketch, which continue to this day outside of the Project Home.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Before we break out into the breakout rooms, Joelle, what's the last, comment you'd like to make about this overall for you and your experience now going forward? What is the future for you in terms of Sketch?
In terms of Sketch, what is the future? Can I just say my takeaway from the whole Project Home?
Yes.
I think my takeaway, I was very inspired, and I think the reason why I was very inspired was because I saw Sketch go from a stressful situation where they need to raise, I think, $3 million. And then even I was there like, how is this going to happen? And we made it happen. I think my main takeaway is that if you do believe in something, you can achieve it, which sounds cliche, but when you witness it firsthand, it's a great reminder. So that is my main takeaway. And I think where the future lies with Project Home and Sketch and Street Voices, which is the organization I founded within Sketch, is to continue growing. And then hopefully in the future, we can have our own version of Project Home. Not the problem, but the fundraising success that Project Home has done. So
yeah, excellent. Ron, what about you? What do you take away at the end of the day? What's the message you want to convey to the whole group?
I think it's so important. And earlier we were talking about diversity and inclusion. And I think the fact that this program was inclusive in the sense that you didn't have to be, a foundation or a multimillionaire to participate in this, that if you had $500 or $1,000, right, you could be part of this whole project just like everybody else. And I think, 10 people who've come in with $1,000, that's way more powerful than one individual who comes in with 10,000. And 10 of those are more powerful and supportive than one individual who may be able to write a check for 100,000. So I really have been impressed with the grassroots, and participants who have maybe modest means, but they're included in this, and they're part of the whole project, the whole family, and And then I think what happens is when the smaller people show their support for this, that brings attention that larger organizations and the foundations, eventually do come on board, maybe to a higher level than they might have otherwise.
Thank you so much. I thank you everyone for all your insights. I know that people are going to want to ask you direct questions. So we have arranged to have the breakout rooms, as they explained at the beginning of the session. So each panelist will be sent to one of the rooms. So each of us are going to go to a private room, and then the participants will be able to join for questions. But before I go, thank you so much. You can reach out to myself at Sketch if you want to have any further discussions as well. Yeah, and I'll let turn it back over to Social Innovation Canada.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rudy. I just wanted to remind the panelists as well as the attendees that we have an opportunity for Q&A right now. So we'll take another 5-10 minutes for the audience Q&A. Please use the I know everybody's excited about the networking. We love that component of events always. But if you have any questions, please use the raise hand icon, which is located at the under the reactions tab at the bottom. If you have any questions, we see some really good questions in the chat as well. So perhaps in the meantime, Rudy, you can go over those until we some live questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that reminder. I didn't say at the beginning, I have to always confess, I'm always nervous. So sorry if any of that is coming off on you. Let's ask some questions. Great. Okay, so the first question that we have is from, not Kathleen. Could you do a breakdown of the capital fundraising? Michael, do you want to do that? Take that one, of the capital fundraising. Like, how do you guarantee the interest rate on the bond?
Oh, sure. So what we did was we developed a debt stack where we needed to have a certain amount of equity to ensure that we could service the bond and that the debt to equity ratio wasn't too high. And that was the portion of the capital raise where we went out and got donations, cash donations for that portion of the loans. There was always a minimum debt to equity ratio. Then we next went and raised about, I think it was $1.5 million as a traditional mortgage, but we used the $1.1 million for the actual purchase of the property. And then the remaining $400,000 we use as a line of credit for operations, which is a small portion of that. And the remaining portion is not touched because that provides the liquidity when a liquidation event occurs or when the bonds mature, and it provides a bit of a buffer so the organization has time to kind of fundraise. The way we had done it also, we had staggered the debt, so not all the debt becomes due at the same time, and that was on the recommendation of Tapestry, who've done this before. So it gives the organization time to work on each of those tranches around the fundraise. And in the back end, you're looking at building up donations to replace that debt with cheaper capital. So ultimately, you would want to kind of pay down that debt. But the innovative part is really kind of when you have a line of credit or when you have a traditional credit, often you can use that to leverage debt, where we use that for the community bonds to satisfy the needs of some of the larger institutional investors, that there would be some form of liquidity to pay back the debt. Around the interest payments and servicing it, well, that comes from where it was in the budget already. That was the rent we were paying. The servicing of the mortgage is actually lower than the rent. So that goes into operations, but also goes into reserve to ensure that we're able to service the debt.
That's great. Thank you. And maybe speak to a little bit, we had lots of conversations about this. In terms of the Bond A, if people are getting a charitable receipt, what about the part where they have to pay taxes on that?
So this is the thing, everybody wants to be philanthropic. There are individuals who can afford to write really big checks, but we all can, because our balance sheets are sometimes stronger than the organizations we want to support. So if you have a line of credit and there's a certain amount of interest you pay versus what the bond would return, you're able to finance these organizations, and the interest rate was pretty low at the time. So what we did was we said to investors, if you don't need that interest, because it's a pretty small amount in the greater scheme of things, do you want to donate it back? And some individuals were worried about the principal amount and not necessarily the interest, and were very willing to donate that interest back, which interest is taxable, but you are able to offset some of that tax with the tax credit you get from making that donation. Right. So the idea is really, how do you effectively donate, double down really, because you're providing an interest-free loan, which the impact is immense because it opens up so many channels for the organization. And secondly, around the financing, how do you reduce that cost for the organization? Well, if it's a charitable organization, they're able to issue receipts, and you've got to just make sure that the interest you're paying is market related, that you're not trying to dodge or do a tax play. Everything needs to be above board and needs to be vetted by legal experts, so you don't put the reputation at risk of the organization.
That's great. And also, I think it's important that we also communicated with people. They weren't betting the farm on Sketch, as the old traditional saying, right? That they knew this was impact investment. So what they were giving, they were able to manage within their portfolios, and they had the advice to be able to manage to do that. So with people who were giving, and there were some who gave quite large investments, they had that advice working with them. So it has not, it's like I said, I think I see the trend growing towards people making a donation on those interest payments. And then the question is, what is the plan to address the maturing bonds in 3 to 5 years? It's actually 3, 5, and 7 years that we have. Very good question. And it's staggered. So it's staggered by months too, because not only is it that every year, at those year markers, but also different months that people purchase their bonds. So you do have to do a very detailed cash flow and repayment plan. Part of the plan for us, there's multi-levels. So one is, what is our revenue generation that's going to feed into paying off those bonds? Is it fundraising by part? Can you do that? Is it revenue generation through other methods? So we are creating alternative revenue generation methods to be able to contribute towards that. That also aligns with the work of Sketch. I won't go into great detail about that because that would take a whole other session, but a revenue generator, also that how many of the bonds, at what point can we pay off and pay back fully? How many do we want where people might want to reinvest and things are going well, they enjoy it, how much can we continue to carry? And how many would we have to resell? So obviously the end goal is to close them off, but at the same time, you have to manage it while at the same time maintaining your operations in the organization. So you have to have a multi-level plan towards paying it off. And for us, it will be 7 years for sure, because that's when the last of the bonds are mature. So minimum, it'll be 7 years as a project, but I see that as 7 years of developing relationships with people as well. So that's a key part of it. Next question is, what percentage of the investors give back the donated interest on their bonds? So in the first year, we've had 1 year, and we received on the A bond, 50% of the A bonds gave back full. Some gave portion of their interest payments back. And we'll see as the years grow and as it increases. In the D bonds, there was about a 10% return on that. And the others, because they're foundations, you pay that back full. And if there's corporations, so far we've paid them back full. So I think it will increase as we go, but it'll certainly maintain as we grow, hopefully, given the news, the inflation rates and all those things that are impacting everyone, we can hope. But I think the key there is the messaging again around the value that every donation is going to have, right? The value not only in the dollar, but also in what that means to the work, being able to go back into the work of Sketch. There's a question from Marcel. I'm working on a profit for-profit, a startup addressing affordability. What are the next steps to tap into social innovation capital? And can we explain this process? So my understanding is you're in a for-profit startup and trying to sort out what would be the social innovation capital accessible to you, what kind of ways.
So I know there's Toronto Enterprise Fund, which is a fund specifically for people working on social innovation projects. So that's,
Yeah, thank you, Joel. That's right. Any advice, Michael, to anyone who's starting on, to build their capital for a project?
So there are lots of organizations out there around with capital available for innovative structures, where there is cheap kind of funding to start you off, and it's also approaching different foundations who work in the space with the same, who are mission aligned, asking for a grant to kind of start off, or using kind of innovative financing where they can participate in the equity at a future date, so it doesn't kind of squeeze your cash flow. So there's lots of different vehicles you can use. You just got to find the right investor. The trick is the partners that you go in have to be aligned, because if they're not, you got to be at loggerheads, because it will take time to pay back, especially if it's a social enterprise, because it's a long payback and you got to be partners for a substantial period of time.
Yeah, you have to like each other. Or at least align. Yes. Yeah. Very good question here. What kind of ways did you use to find potential bond investors? Well, we did a lot of things. Like it was a number of different ways. A lot of social media was put in place. A lot of storytelling focus, marketing what the story was, what was the urgency and the issue we were facing if we didn't do this, and sharing that story. Having the ambassadors like Joelle being able to come and speak with people and be involved and engaged in the conversations. We did these kinds of webinars where we were inviting people to come and find out what the potential is, and inviting people to consider becoming a bond holder with Sketch. So we did a lot of seminars online during that time. We also did community meetings, community gatherings before COVID. We met with people in person and did group discussions about what is this, what is community bonds, because most people don't have an understanding of what community bonds are about, and how Sketch could be part of something like that, because we don't have, it's not like, if you know CSI, which is the Center for Social Innovation, they were really the leaders in the bonds coming certainly into the GTA, but they had a building where people rented, and so that was their revenue stream. But how does an organization like Sketch do it when our main revenue is by fundraising? So having lots of conversations and potential investor meetings were critical. Presentations. It was you have to have within the organization a dedication of at least one person who's going to dedicate a good percentage of their time. For me, it was probably about 80% of my time in those critical years was spent on reaching out and communicating and talking about the project.
Really, the other challenge that which you navigated really well was not to cannibalize your existing donor base, because you're buying a building, right? But you don't want the donors to stop funding the project. So that means you have to go and find a new set of individuals to fund it. So that was really tricky, because the board was very clear with us that if you got to get donors to fund it, they cannot cannibalize existing projects, because that's the real reason. So it is a bit of a challenge, because you're looking at a completely different set of investors and donors.
Exactly. And podcasts, that was another one, to talk with social investor or social impact advisors, and they would have podcasts, so we would go on those and speak to those, and that would generate quite a bit of interest from people who are looking for alternative ways of investing their funds. So that was also another excellent way. Are there any other questions or people who want to ask directly? I think we've covered most of them in the questions. If not, we can move to the group's networking session now, and you can have some time individually with people to ask more specific detailed questions. And Do you want to then again remind people of how they might be able to do that?
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, Rudy, Joelle, Ron, and Michael, for very insightful and informative discussions and for sharing such a powerful investment readiness journey with us today. It was such a privilege for us to host this conversation. Thank you to our attendees for those great questions. For those of you who didn't get a chance to ask your questions, you have another opportunity to do so during our networking, which is a good segue to that session. So for the networking session, you can select a breakout room you would like to join. You should see an option called breakout, join a breakout room, or just a breakout room icon on your screen at the bottom. You can select a room you would like to join. We will have one speaker per room, so there will be 4 different options. Once you join the room, you have another 15 to 20 minutes to meet and greet with the speaker and other attendees of this event. And when that networking is complete, so up in about 20 minutes, we will end the Zoom meeting on our end. You don't have to do anything. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in one of the breakout rooms. And as a final reminder, please subscribe to our social finance newsletter to receive the dates and announcements for these regular webinars, as well as our timely news on social finance. The link to subscription page should be included in the chat momentarily. Thank you again for joining us, and please select your breakout rooms now and join us for networking. Thank you.